For the keynote, it is my pleasure to have Chris O'Neill, who's CEO of GrowthLoop, which is an interesting name. And just to start off, if you could just kind of give us a little bit of your background.
Sure.
So to give us a context of why, why I thought that you would be a wonderful addition to talk with us.
We'll let the audience decide how wise that would. No, I'm Chris. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm Tuck 01. I'm adding up those numbers and it makes me feel really old. I'm born and raised in Canada. Go Jays, for those Jays fans out there. All right, bring it on. But no, I'm delighted to be here. I've been really fortunate in my time since Tuck. I've had the good fortune to be in technology in a variety of settings with big brands like Google. So this is feels like home turf because we used to do a lot of events here. I've done turnarounds of companies like Evernote. I've done startups. I've been really fortunate to really see lots of different ups and downs and twists and turns as a leader in technology. And never more so excited to be living through this massive revolution that we're going to talk about here today. I have a lovely wife and 2 children that are one's off at college and one's still here in high school. So I'm living through their lens as well to see how they're making out with AI, among other things. And last but maybe not least, I'm on the board of Gap, the clothing company. So trying to play a small part in helping some iconic brands find their way in this very dynamic times that we live through. So it's a pleasure to be here. Love questions, and we're going to have a nice chat here today.
Great. So I hope you have a better sense of why we asked. And remember at the beginning I talked about what we're trying to do is give you different lenses of people's perspectives around AI and AI use. And one of the great things about Chris is he has experienced so many different perception lenses of dealing with AI. Everything from a tech company startup to a legacy company trying to adapt to it, to a smaller company, to larger companies. And so he can bring multiple perspectives in just based on your experience to this.
I think that means I just haven't been able to hold a job for very long. Just lots of different experiences.
That's true. Or I'd like to say you're so valuable that you always get poached. So we'll leave it at that. And I'm going to start this. And actually, as I thought about it, I was like, I'm not calling you old, but you've been around.
Seasoned.
Right, you're seasoned, right? And so you've been in the technology space for a long time.
Yeah.
Where we are now, is there anything as you were, as it's progressing, where you're surprised or you wouldn't have guessed we're here now based on kind of your experience through?
Yeah, so as I said, I graduated in 2001, so I saw the before, during, and after of the dot-com wave. And history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. So in many ways, what we're living through now, and when the mortgage meltdown happened in 08 and 09, and what we're living through now, there's some similarities. But to your point about what surprises me, the slope and the pace of the change is very different, very steep. The pace of change, I have a hard time keeping up with, there's a new model being dropped seemingly every week, new protocols, new applications. It's just the slope and the progress is really incredible. And the other thing, while AI is not a new term, the pervasiveness and the creativity, and the way in which it's caught the creativity and the imagination of society is amazing. So that's led it to be pervasive. On the other side of the ChatGPT moment, it is everything from creativity, like helping create documents, to synthesizing documents, to writing code, to doing customer support. I'm surprised at the slope and the pervasiveness with which artificial intelligence has woven its way into so many parts of our personal and professional lives.
You talked about the pace of change, and it was interesting because in the previous panel, actually the first panel this morning, they were talking about with Anthropic, well, we dropped this model and this model within 2 weeks, and then, well, this model's for that, and this model's for that. And it's interesting as you think about people who aren't, that's not their day-to-day job, how do they keep up? So for you as a CEO, how do you think about keeping up, but also how do you think about the expectations of your management structure, people who work for you? How do they keep up? What are your expectations?
Yeah, I'd say two things. You got to hire really well. The team you build is the company you build. That's an easy thing to say. It's hard to do. But I'm very comfortable hiring people much smarter than me and who bring a different perspective. And together as a leadership team, we make our way through. And then the other thing is there's nothing like actually doing this stuff, right? Like our last management offsite, we dedicated 2 or 3 hours to vibe coding stuff. We all created an app. Everyone, our HR person in legal, and it was eye-opening, right? So there's nothing like... Wait a minute,
before what was your app?
I created, my son is into photography.
Okay.
And I was like, wouldn't it be cool to take some of his photos and just create like a website for him to buy and sell his photography. So I did that in literally an hour.
Okay.
We had some woman from Boston creating a like local neighborhood advocacy website and application to get a petition signed. I mean, it's just amazing. So I guess the reason I give you these examples is like, it's not just for the nerds, right? Like everyone can do things. Like we're literally wrapping up a hackathon, like literally as I'm speaking here right now, and everyone in the company's hacking, right? Our HR person is doing something interesting. I can't wait to see what it is, but like it's hands-on in the actual applications. There's nothing that beats that.
Okay, so let me pause you there. So I'm going to go to the audience, and so I'm going to kill myself. So, lightning round. Tell me what app you would build. Tell me, what app would you build right now?
I build an intelligent learning system.
Intelligent learning system. What app would you build?
Stargazing things for the evening.
Stargazing things. What app would you build? Hotel selector. What app would you build?
Dumpling finder.
I don't even know what that is. Okay. What app would you build?
Something like exercise or help.
Exercise or help. Brent, what app would you build?
Build something to manage my kids' chores.
Manage your kids' chores. Couple more. What app would you build?
Netflix show recommender.
Netflix show recommender. What app would you build?
Push-up contest better.
Okay. We should talk later. That's interesting. I don't know why. What app would you build?
Marathon training.
Marathon training. One from this. What app would you build? Food recommender. All right. Okay, good. The reason why I want to ask is that as we talk about this, often when the application of AI, whether it's apps or whether it's other things, we often think it has to be this complex enterprise, big thing. But the way that you get skills, talent, and ability is about doing things you're interested in. And all of those lessons that you get, whether it's building a push-up app, they translate that you bring to your company and you bring to your enterprise.
Yeah.
And then it's fun, it's active, it's not drudgery, it's not a new task. It is a new set of skills that you enjoy using that you bring to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's like lovable, Replit. There's so many tools, and the growth is exponential in part because of these prosumer, consumer applications.
Right.
But I'll tell you, you're talking about this whole like just getting in and doing it. I'll tell you, the very first interaction from the board at Gap, the memo that I received was disappointing. It was describing the defense, basically all the hoops you'd have to jump through in order to even consider signing up for it. And I politely said back to the management, I said, I get it, we need to be careful, but that's the opposite, right? How do you break down the fear that this thing's gonna take my job? How do you basically make it okay? We can riff on that. I know there was a session about how do you have an AI native company, but like, you have to find ways to make it easy, and then you have to make ways to make it expected, and then you have to make it fun. I love what you just did there. And my question, if I had a second question, is like, what's stopping you from doing it?
Exactly.
Right? Like, it literally would take you a couple hours on a weekend, or whatever, and it's fun.
Right.
It's fun.
And so, again, as we go through this session, that is one of the things that we would recommend. That if part of the capability is important for you, spend a weekend building something, not for your company, but that interests you. And that'll be the way that you build the capabilities. So connected to that, how has the ubiquitous nature of AI, or at least its growing ubiquitous nature, affects how you manage? How do you think about managing? Or more broadly, how should leaders think about management?
Yeah, and I think in many ways, leadership and management hasn't changed, and I'll explain what I mean by that as it relates to agents and using AI. But I'd say it's freed up some of my time to be more present, right? I can basically take reports and get, we have agents like Google used to have this thing called snippets, where basically every week you would send the 3 things you'd accomplished in the previous week and what you're going to do that week. We do a version of that at our company, so I have a pulse on what's happening inside our company, like automatically pushed to me every Sunday night. So when I show up at work on a Monday, I have that context, right? That's one. I can crunch through and get summations of all the things that I'm asked to consume. I use deep research very frequently to prepare for maybe a big speech. Every prospect call that I'm on from a GrowthLoop perspective, I get as much detail as I want automatically at my fingertips. So I can show up and be present and be more prepared and then really flex into the human things that are there. What I was mentioning in terms of what hasn't changed, if you think about what agents represent, right? They're just like 1,000 interns at your disposal. So if you're really good at problem definition, I think great leaders and great managers especially are very good at defining a problem. They can think like a systems thinking to say, like, what are the components of the problems or the tasks? How do you set expectations for what perfection or what good looks like? And then how do you give feedback in context so that that person, or in this case an agent, can do its best work? So it's even individual contributors in my mind are now managers. They're just managing agents in addition to the interactions with other members of their team. So I very much view this as a team, not as a replacement.
Right.
And your job becomes much more about orchestration than it is doing all the different discrete tasks yourself.
I mean, that's interesting because in some ways what you just said is, as we think about what AI is going to do for employment and managers, and you hear people saying, oh, middle managers are going away. Yeah. That's a little bit of a different take, that you're almost saying everyone's going to become a manager.
Yeah. Right?
That you just have you have a set of agents that you manage no matter what level in the organization you are.
Think about a coder today, right? They basically have agents to basically help them co-create code, check the quality of their code. I mean, they're managing. They're just not managing people. Right. They're managing these agents. So that's a different mindset shift that I'd encourage, and certainly I encourage in the companies that I'm involved with.
Well, in that vein, let's talk a little bit about jobs. It's one of the things that lots of our students worry about, and we've talked about a little bit in some of the other panels. How does, again, the rise of AI, I have to be careful when I say like that, it makes me think of Terminator, right? The rise of AI. But the increased use of AI, how do you think it's going to impact job structure? Has it changed how you hire and what you look for in people that you hire? And what are the skills and capabilities you think people need to have in order to be attractive?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I'll declare my bias. I am an optimist on all this, although there's nuance, right? I'm not here to suggest there will not be jobs that will go away. There, of course, will be jobs that will go away. I believe that there'll be net new jobs that will be created we can't even think about right now. But the real interesting action is how you actually integrate AI into your workflow, as in the ways in which I was describing before. So what do I look for in hiring? Like, you can't ignore fundamentals, right? If you're going to actually be a manager of these agents, you have to be able to understand the fundamentals of coding or of sales or of product development. You can't just pretend you're going to outsource this because you can't expect and inspect what you expect if you don't know the fundamentals. So those still matter, right? You have to learn the substrate of your function or your craft, if you will. In terms of what I look for in hiring, you know, it's interesting. We were comparing a little bit in a pre-call just the different personalities of our children, and it's amazing to me as a parent of 2 children how different my kids are. But you know, my son, like yours, has a lot of you know, very deep and passionate, although frequently changing interests and curiosities. One day it's airplanes, and then next it's like, you know, he's obsessed with Kiss right now, like the rock band. The guy, person died last night. He was very sad. But like, anyway, my point is having curiosity to go down and interested in, and be curious about the world, and then really think about different and new ways to bring to bear to solve different problems. I think that's the curiosity. People shouldn't be fearful of this, right? I do not know of a single company that I talk to that does not want someone in their company who has superpowers with AI. I've not met a single person. So, you know, it's interesting. I got to know the Shopify crew a lot, and you know, people would ask me, "How do I get a job at Shopify?" You know, my advice to them was, how about you build a Shopify site? Why don't you start a little micro business, right? Same thing. Act like it's one thing to learn intellectually and then read, but doing is how you actually learn, right? There's a fancy Japanese proverb or quote that more eloquently says that if you tell me, I'll listen. If you show me, I will like understand. But to truly master something, you got to do it, right? And I believe that fundamental. So I want people who are doers, right? I can tell you an example very recently, two different candidates for a role. One person had the pristine, if I just looked at the resume, it was pristine, perfect. Literally had deep expertise, had all the grades, had all everything you would look for objectively. Another candidate, less perfect, but I'll tell you, she was vibe coding on the weekends. She was basically creating new technologies and new ways to think about it. And guess who we hired? We hired that candidate. Right, and guess what she did within her first week? She's created a GPT that basically is like an all-knowing bot to basically ask questions about our competitive differentiation. So we're in hiring ramp right now. That thing is used by almost everyone in our company almost every day, including me. It's like, holy cow. So you want people who are creative and really a bias to doing stuff and being less fearful about this technology and more embracing of it to use it in ways like I'm describing.
Okay. All right. Going to put you back to work. Quick question. If you had AI superpowers, if you were an expert in AI, what would you use it for? What would you use it for? Whether job, whatever, what would you use it for? In the food crisis. If you had AI superpowers, what would you use it for?
Oh, truth in media.
Truth in media. Thank you. If you had AI superpowers, what would you?
I think I'll use all the resources to increase the productivity, and I'll improve my human interaction time.
Okay, but that was a business school answer, though. All right. Okay. What would you use your AI superpower for?
Generate alpha and middle market transactions.
Okay.
Right.
That's an even more business school answer. All right. Someone from this table, if you had AI superpowers, what would you use it for? Yes. Medical diagnosis. All right. Couple more. This table, what would you use it for? Someone.
Optimize the global power grid.
Optimize the global power grid. What would you use it for? Better parenting? Good. I could use that. This table, what would you use it for? AI superpowers. You were the world's best at AI. What would you use it for?
Analyze bread baking recipes.
Analyze. Wait a minute. You would have AI superpowers and you're going to analyze bread baking recipes. Okay. All right. Good. All right. No. Anybody else? Good. What would you do? What would you use it for?
To create a Chris O'Neill digital twin.
Okay, Chris O'Neill, digital twin. All right.
You don't want to do that.
Okay. Last one, this table here. What would you, if you had AI superpower, you were one of the world's best in AI, what would you use it for?
Security application of everybody with this round.
Security applications of that. And again, what's important is I'm asking the question, if you had AI superpower, you all have AI superpower. So you mentioned that we we both have kids. So we
Yeah.
both have kids in college. What should we be encouraging them to learn or to do as we think about them? What would you be encouraging them to learn or to do?
I gave you examples of like pursuing a hobby and thinking of where that could intersect. That's kind of fun and interesting. It is a dilemma, right? So the high school where we send my son and now my daughter, it's a dilemma, right? It's like don't use it to cheat, right? And then use it to get ready for. I mean, it's really a mixed message. So I'm a big believer in using. So I watched my son study recently where he was basically doing versions of flashcards. And I've borrowed this from him to say, I'm trying to learn something, right? If it's a term I haven't learned. Like a couple months ago, I was obsessed with these things called MCP, Model Coding Protocol, which is these things the protocols that allow us to stitch together different things, almost like APIs, if you will. And I didn't know, so I kept asking ChatGPT to ask me questions. Start with the basic and go deep. I see my kids do versions of this with their homework right now. They're like, okay, I don't understand this. Please explain this to me. And what I've encouraged them to do is ask it to ask you and test that you actually understand. I think that's an interesting life hack. So in addition to finding the passions, like I'm serious about all the people who said, everything from like training for a marathon or whatever. These are great use cases. Go build something and you'd be amazed. But also try and use it to be like a real, almost like a tutor, a personalized tutor for you to basically understand things that are interesting to you.
Right. And so you've done that. So let's say your son is home for the summer.
Yeah.
And well, he has a job, but he has some free time. Yeah. What would you suggest he do?
I would love to see him set up a business that actually taught people how to actually use AI, right? It's interesting, part of what I see as a big market opportunity right now, so everyone has made, pretty much most companies at this point have some enterprise license for all these tools. That's not the issue. Availability isn't the issue. What is the issue is actually making people feel comfortable to embrace these things. Also, you and I were talking a little bit, what I'm experimenting with in my company and encouraging companies like Gap to do is think of like a job ladder, right? So in a job ladder, you say, okay, engineer this level, what are the competencies that are expected of that? Or pick any function in a company. Similarly with AI fluency, it should be very clearly, this is like what fogging a mirror looks like, and this is what mastery looks like for each of the different functions in a company. So I'd encourage, kind of like a thing to basically help him both improve his fluency, but then help others do that, and then break it down, right? Part of the fun is that creative, quirky spirit that some people in the world have. Almost think of theater majors to basically make it fun and a journey. Kind of what you're doing to engage the audience, like how do you then bring people along on that journey? I think there's a big business to be made to basically teaching others, people, companies, executives to actually figure this stuff out.
And you touched on, so again, part of the theme of this conference is taking different perspectives, having different lenses. And you've been on both sides. So you've been, and you're involved in, both as an advisor and growing kind of startup companies and also legacy companies that have been around for 50 years.
Yeah.
What advice, as your advisor, what advice would you give a startup company or someone starting up a company? Yeah. And then after you answer that, then we'll come to for a legacy company, whether you're a construction company or a waste management company or a consumer packaged goods company, what advice would you give them?
Yeah.
So let's start with the sort of startup.
Yeah, if you think about just how much the underlying things you need to do for any company, let's start with a startup. I mean, it used to be, I see Sam over here, used to have to buy a server and you had to host it and do all the, literally buy hardware and do all this stuff. Fast forward to where it was this thing called the cloud, and now with artificial intelligence, the ability to do things with very few resources and get to product market fit or on the path to figuring out if this problem really can be solved by what you're thinking is never been cheaper or faster. So when we do product work in our company, and I think companies are increasingly adopting this, it's not some long product spec. It's like vibe code the demo. Like vibe code the most minimal viable product you can. you can do that in hours, right? Not days and weeks to come up with, basically the specs and then have someone build it. No, you can do that stuff in literally hours. So I guess the secret advantage of a startup is being very clear on the problem you're trying to solve, right? And then velocity, right? Velocity is a function of speed in a certain direction, right? So I'd say that's what you have to lean into. These tools are available and they've never been better. So that's what I would suggest for that.
Now let's flip it. Now you're a legacy, like you're with Gap.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
talking to a legacy company,
Yeah.
what would you tell them?
Yeah, well, a lot of the stuff I'm talking about with boosting AI fluency, like I ask like 3 or 4, maybe 5 questions from a board level. The first is to be really clear, not hand wavy, but to say, where is AI going to translate into some demonstrable value, either on the top line or on the bottom line? So being clear about that, right? Get out of the platitudes and all this stuff. Secondly, be really clear about the data and governance and ownership, so you're not going to have accidents. Like the original instinct was to protect the assets, and that's good. You do need to be thoughtful about how you treat your data, and then how you are clear about where agents can be let to roam and rip, and where they need to be tightly controlled by a human. So those are the sorts of things. But the last I'd say is really be thoughtful about where you have a durable advantage. And most of these companies, if they've been around for a while, have great data. AI is not powerful without great data. So context is everything. These agents don't just work well without great context. So if you think about these companies that have amassed data on whether it's customers or a certain part of the economy, how do you figure out, rather than just taking that advantage or that asset and feeding it through traditional channels, for example, maybe you can stand up a different model, right? We were talking a little bit about a Sabre, which is the inventory for airlines and travel, right? I'm thinking, like, for once, can we get to a model where it says, hey, I want to go on vacation, here's my budget, here's a rough destination, and here's how many people are involved. Can you just go? I cannot see why Sabre isn't just doing a feeding through the trade. They could, whether it makes sense business-wise or not, it's up to them to weigh channel conflict and all these other things. But there's a whole bunch of these companies who have these hidden assets that could be amplified and create different business models if they thought creatively about them. But it starts with empowering and enabling their teams to not fear these tools and fear this change, but to embrace and lean into it.
Right. You had mentioned something earlier when you were talking about being in established companies and this idea of fluency.
Yeah.
How do you measure, how do you think about, so if I'm in marketing, AI fluency might be very different than if I'm in the financial sector in a company, or if I'm a warehouse manager. How did you think about, or how do you operationalize AI fluency?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's changing so fast, as I mentioned before. But I think that job ladder is the best that I've seen, where people are, they're not only just saying, hey, well, the tools are there. Like, really what happens when you make the tools are not being used, right, for a whole bunch of reasons. It has to be thought of just like you would think a lecture, right? How do you decompose it to the substrates of the actual, like the atomic units of what you want to teach, and then you break it down to make it easier for people to lean into it. But then the best example I have is really those job ladders where it's like you spell it out. You say, like, literally in marketing, this is what it means. Like right now, for account-based marketing, we're very clear. So this was my Hack Week project. I don't know how far we've made progress. I'll find out in a couple hours. I want for the 500 accounts that we have identified as our named account list, when anything happens to the 5,000 people that are associated with those accounts, I'll give you a very specific example. REI, a former executive at Gap, is now running REI. She's been there for 90 days. About a month ago, 3 weeks ago, she released her plan. I would have loved to know that plan the minute it was published, so that I could follow up and say, hey, Mary Beth, congrats on your plan. Here's 3 ways in which we can help you amplify or de-risk that plan. So how do you think about automatically notifying a team of relevant information about a set of prospects that you're seeking to go influence. That's a silly little example, but that's the kind of stuff that I expect from our marketing team at this point. And there's zillions of, we're only limited by our creativity.
Yeah. And you're running GrowthLoop. Tell me a little bit about why you decided to go that direction. Why do you think that company's direction is one that you wanted to be associated with and that you wanted to spend time with?
Yeah, as you politely mentioned, I've had lots of different experiences, and I've been in big companies, I've been in tiny little companies, and been on Fortune 500 boards. And at this stage of my career, the thing that matters most, and this is cliche to say, is people, right? I want to be with and around people that I really enjoy. I want to be solving problems that resonate with me and a mission that sort of matters in the world. And this is a company I've known for a while. It was a bootstrap company with a lot of friends that I used to work with at Google. We have a lot of fun. There is a world where I don't really want to buy a Ford 150 or an F-150 or whatever the heck it is. And I have friends who are vegetarians, and they get bombarded with irrelevant messaging and loyalty offers. Like, there has to be a different world where we actually truly lean into good experiences with brands, and we're so far from that, and it's frustrated me. So we're taking a small little dent in that problem, and that resonates with me, right? Some people are going after coding. Some people are going after customer success. I helped launch a company called Glean, which is doing kind of ChatGPT and Google inside companies. Like, there's no shortage of problems about existing workflows and problems in the world that you got to resonate. So this is what matters to me right now, and I'm having fun. It's a fun scale. We're small, so I know everyone in the company, and I like our investors. So yeah, that's why I'm doing it.
Okay. Now I'm going to pause here a little bit because I'm going to go to the questions in the audience for a moment. But I'm going to have one more, not one more because I may have more. Lightning round. What scares you the most about AI? What scares you the most about AI? Who haven't I talked? What scares you the most about AI?
I think how there's a lot of use cases out there that it could be used for that are not very good for human
Okay. So,
Yeah.
and in 3 words, okay? 3 words. So can you do it in 3 words?
I think replacement of jobs.
Replacement of jobs. Yep. Okay. What scares you the most about AI? 3 words.
Spreading misinformation.
Spreading misinformation. Has anybody over who have I?
I was going to say perpetuating bias.
Perpetuating bias. 3 words.
I was going to say job loss.
Job loss. Anybody in this table who hasn't? Gentleman right there. Nah, you're reading on somebody else's paper. Yes. Large-scale bad actors. Will.
People dying.
People. Okay. All right. 3 words. Misalignment. Loss of imagination. Interesting. Yes. Harming the human experience. See, this side is much deeper than this side. Okay. All right. Couple more. Time to perfect. Couple more. Yes.
Paper clips.
Paper clips. I may come back to that one because you got within my 3-word limit, but I'm not exactly sure. I think I got this table, right? No, yes. Competitors leveraging, moving more quickly. One more. Yeah. Amplification of evil. Ooh, deep. That's very
deep.
No, good. What scares you about AI?
Yeah, I'm with the evil crowd. That's very deep. I do think there's really an issue with bias that we need to be wary of. That I think is something that we need to figure out. I also think there's going to be good tension in terms of regulation. Clearly, this needs to be regulated somehow, but I've not met a government that really, in early stages of technology, gets that right. So I do think there's really policy implications.
Right.
This is clearly going to set the stage for competitive differentiation across. Think of U.S. and China as one example or vector. of competition, it's going to be that important. So the societal implications run deep, and we don't know where this is going to go.
One of the, not criticisms, but when we talk about regulation, is that people often say the speed of change is so quick and legislation is so slow, that legislation and regulation can never keep up with the speed of change that we're seeing now. What's your response?
I think that's absolutely true. It's been true. I mean, I was remember in the early days of when Google was popping up, and it was hard to educate. A lot of the team would spend time in Washington or in Canada when I was up there with Ottawa. We spent time trying to educate, and it's like that's not typically, at least in North America, like tech isn't super high on the politicians' radar. I think it ought to be. I think countries like Singapore and others do an amazing job at basically attracting the type of caliber of people who have curiosity and depth in tech. So that would be an interesting thing to think about. I'm not super optimistic that that's going to change anytime soon.
Right.
But that is, I think it's vital. And I also think on average it's best to let things roll in the early stages so you don't crush what is clearly something that has, again, I'm an optimist, so I think that the good is so far going to outweigh the bad. Right. And like anything, right? Like any technology, anything can be used for good or bad. Okay. And I hope that we find ways to minimize this amplification of evil and other things like that. First of all, I think it won't. I think headlines and society tends to gravitate to polarity and like binary things, and I don't subscribe to that. Right? Open source, closed source, there'll probably be a mix of those two. But it's interesting because about a year, maybe two ago, it was, oh, of course, like OpenAI is just going to roll over everything, and all these silly wrapper companies are going to be roadkill. Oh, and then we wake up, a couple months later, and then it's like, well, the application layer is going to be where the most value is going to be accrued. So, look, I mean, I just don't subscribe to the extremes, and it's going to go here or there. There's going to be value created at all levels. Look, I mentioned Glean as a company. It's clearly one of the killer apps that's emerged at the application layer. There's a whole host of like Harvey and legal things. Like there seems to be like a new legal application that shows up almost every month, it feels like. So there's no doubt going to be real value at the application layer, and I'd argue that's probably where most of it's going to be. If we zoom all the way out for a second, just think of what's happened with the cloud. I'll get these numbers wrong, but directionally right. If you go back 15, 20 years ago, the software market was circa $300 billion, right? And that market grew, but the real story was on-premise to cloud. So that 300 million became a $400 million market, but it went from being 5 to 10% cloud to being like almost all cloud, right? And that's interesting. But what we're talking about right now is addressing services, right? Trillions of dollars. So the TAM is super huge. So my advice is don't get thrown off by the headlines and be told what you can and can't do. Go find a problem, define it really, really narrowly. I like to say think big, start small, and act fast, right? So really defining a problem that is resonant with you and then get after it and move fast. The best, I think, is putting controls inside of a company. So I was mentioning that before, right? I think understanding your data assets always been important in my view, never more so now, right? So you have to understand at a slightly de-averaged perspective in your data, or segmented would probably be a better way to say it. Like, what is that data? Who owns it? Who's responsible for the clarity, the cleanliness of that data, and can trace it all the way back in the provenance of your data? So I'd say that. And then the other thing, part of what's cool with these tools is sort of a serendipity slider, if you will, where you can basically, literally, if you think about, I'll use vibe coding as an example, you can basically say to it, like literally, check each line as I'm doing it, right? To help me generate it, or check that it's properly written. Or the extreme, the other side of it, you can just basically say, hey, just go do it. Like describe an app, and it will come back. It will hallucinate like hell, But it will basically do that. And the way I think about that is like the way Bezos talks about type 1, type 2 decisions. You have to be clear as to when you can let agents rip, when it's a reversible, low-stakes decision or implication, and when it's the opposite, when it's like a hard-to-reverse decision and or whether stakes are very, very high. So I think from a governance perspective, boards and companies need to be really, really thoughtful about especially the data assets and how these models are being used. And I think you'd also want to put some guardrails around to protect so the data isn't leaking into the public LLMs. The best answer I can give you is we choose our partners carefully. I mean, there's all sorts of partners that we just politely say no, right? For varieties, and there's a lack of alignment with values, and whether that's like firearms or other things in that direction.
Okay. So
that's the best I can offer in that time. But like ultimately, yeah, companies are going to have to express, and I believe that sunshine's the best disinfectant, right? Like ultimately, we talk about people joining companies and being fearful because the jobs are going to be replaced, but I'm a very big believer that companies and the younger generations especially, they want to work for something that matters and resonates with them, like the values, right? Like a lot of people in boards sometimes talk about how you have to have all these checklists and so forth. And like I believe you can't fake, you can't astroturf your way to greatness. If you're going to attract the best and the brightest in a company, they're going to want to work for something that makes them proud, right? That means different things to different people, but I think authentically, companies that have a purpose, a mission that matters, becomes even more important. One of the things when this company, GrowthLoop, was getting started, a lot of the journey was traveling over lack of data maturity, right? Large retailers, Gap's no exception, right? Have so much data, and trying to figure out how to actually get it in a useful state, clean it and normalize it. Sometimes to talk about the semantic layer of data, which is where the value is unlocked, meaning you don't just put data together and it like sort of just tells you answers. So I think you don't really have a good AI strategy if you don't have good data strategy, is sort of what I like to talk to people about. The good news is people have gotten that memo. If you think about the rise of companies like Snowflake and Databricks and Google and AWS, like there's a reason for that. It's really clear. There's a lot of really great capabilities that have been built and continue to be built. The compound marketing growth rate of those markets is like measured in the 30 to 50% range. So it's amazing what's happened. So there's lots of different types of data to be clean. Transaction data is sometimes very difficult. But ultimately, someone mentioned trust. I think ultimately how companies interact with their customers and specifically their data, I think is a very important, competitive differentiation, and doing that well and with respect is a huge part of it. But technically, there's a lot of innovation happening to basically bring data in from lots of different sources to make sense of it. And then actually, again, we like to play a small part in maybe applying it in interesting ways with loyalty programs and first-party data that is very valuable and helps guide better experiences in a product or services company. And that's what makes me proud of the work that we do. And again, we're only early in the journey.
Yeah. Now this will be my last time I will ask a question, but I'm going to be nicer this time because this is going to be a tougher question. What is one thing that you're going to remember from this talk? Okay, what is one thing, one thing, and I'm going to come back here and ask you, Chris, what would you want them to remember? What is one thing that you were going to remember from this talk? Anyone? Anyone? This is a tougher question. Yes?
Think big, start small, and act fast.
Okay, think big, start small, act fast. Anyone else? Anyone else? Yes? Don't be afraid. Great.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Yes? Okay, set the culture around AI. Yes? Be the doer. I like that. Anyone over here? Anyone? Yes? Value creation will not be binary. Ooh, that's deep. Okay? What do you, I won't allow explanation. Okay, I'll keep going. Yes? Good data. Yeah. Right? Yes? Velocity is competitive advantage. Just a couple of more you would remember from this. Yes? everyone can become a manager. I love that one. Okay? So I'll come to you, Chris. What would you want people to remember from this talk?
Yeah, I'd say embrace AI and find a way to make it something that you don't fear, but that you can start to see value in big and small ways. So make it a part of your team.
Yeah. Has anything, like, have you changed your mind about anything regarding AI recently?
Yeah. The advances, so I'll tell you very specifically, we call ourselves GrowthLoop, and one of the things I thought would be very, very like next year, which in startup land is like never, is how do you use these models to do creative stuff? Meaning, copy's one thing, but I'm talking about video, sight, sound, and motion. I mean, the advanced slope of like Sora. Have you guys seen Sora? Like, was it last week? I don't even remember anymore. And then Nano Banana. Have you guys played around with those things? I mean, it's insane. Like, I would not have thought that we would be, at that level of production quality, like video, anytime soon. I mean, we had our last board meeting in LA about a month ago, and it was like I don't know if anyone in LA recently. You can feel LA's been through a tough time right now. It is palpable, the difference between San Francisco and LA in terms of its perspective towards AI. It's really hurting the industry down there. And I think it's in part because the creativity that's allowed with these tools and these models is astounding. I've changed my mind because I used to think that was never going to happen.
Right.
Boy, I think there's pretty interesting things happening right now with creativity and these videos and just creative applications for artificial intelligence I would have never imagined.
And that's a very optimistic view. Let me just turn a little bit before we end. What's overhyped? Is there anything you think, because you've been very optimistic about, again, the change and the impact.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you said, it's a little bit overhyped?
Yeah. There's a lot of fishy stuff going on with these circular deals that are happening right now with the funding and all. So basically you have these massive outlays of capital being depreciated over many, many years and then burned through in like a year or something. So there's some stuff that's going to be corrected in terms of how these things are being financed, and the round tripping on deals. I mean, it's cute, and they're much smarter people than me in finance that can maybe unpack the what's legit and versus what's not. But that tends to not end well. And I think one of the things, this guy Ben Thompson, his Stratechery newsletter guy, he basically talks about there are good bubbles and bad bubbles, right? If you think about like laying cable, and like that paid off some dividends down the road because we had faster internet when that cable was like capacity grew into it, versus say webvan was just basically lighting a lot of Super Bowl ads and all that kind of nonsense was bad bubble. That was bad bubble. Right. There's some good bubble. So I think I do worry about some of those things, the financing shenanigans that smell off to me, and then how much of this is going to be good versus bad, because I'd argue we're feeling a little frothy right about now.
Yeah. Now, here's a question. I'll pose it in two different ways, and you can choose which way to answer. What is something that we should be asking about AI, but you don't think people are asking enough about? Or if we had your twin in the audience, what would your twin be asking you?
God forbid. God forbid that. I spent some time breaking my teeth on some, cancer and some healthcare related questions. Like, I would love for us to be putting a lot against how do we start to break down some of the barriers that exist within how we treat disease. I would love for us to put something in that. And a good friend of mine, Kevin Wheel, who is at OpenAI, he's been an amazing product leader at many different companies in the Valley. His now full-time job is the intersection of OpenAI, ChatGPT, and life sciences. So I would love for us to throw a lot at that, because I'm very optimistic that there's so much data that's there that hasn't really been properly processed, and we now have the compute power to go do that. I would love it if we could figure out a more sustainable way to do the energy to power all this.
Yep.
But that maybe is a topic for some other time. Okay. I think our friends to the north, Canada, might be able to help us with some sustainable energy solutions. So maybe we should be nicer to Canada. That'd be a nice thing too.
All right. Well, I just want to say, we're at time. You've been, for a lunchtime audience, well, for any audience, you've been great, but particularly for a lunchtime audience, you've been great. I hope you see why we asked Chris and the value and the amazing value and perspective that he's brought. So Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.